The gun had been with him for 11 years. It had ridden at his hip across 3 territories, through 2 cattle drives and 1 range war that nobody had officially called a war, through a winter in the Dakotas that froze the creek solid and killed 4 men who were better prepared than he was. It was not a beautiful object. The walnut grip had been worn pale by his thumb, and the barrel carried a scratch along its left side from the night a man in Abilene had tried to take it from him. He had kept it. The man had not fared as well. But that was the life Oleander Fitch had lived, and he was not proud of it. And he had decided, sometime around the end of his 38th year, that he was done. He buried the gun on a Tuesday in the red clay behind the barn, wrapped in oilcloth and laid 3 feet down. He did not mark the spot. He did not say any words over it. He went back inside, put coffee on the iron stove, and stood at the window watching the light come over the hills. The hills were brown and dry that time of year, and the sky was the particular shade of pale blue that came before the heat settled in for the day. He told himself he was a rancher now. He told himself the past was buried with the gun. He had almost believed it. That was the spring Della Ames came to Harrow Creek. She arrived the way the unlucky always arrived in towns like that, on the back of a freight wagon that wasn't going anywhere better, sitting on the hard bench with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, because she had decided, somewhere on the long road from Clayford, that she would not let herself look like what she was, which was a woman at the end of her rope. She was 24 years old. She had 40 cents and a carpetbag. She had dark copper hair that caught the late afternoon light like something burning, wide-set green eyes the color of bottle glass held to the sun, and a jaw that had been set for so long against so many things that it had become the permanent expression of her face. Not hard, but resolved, the way a fence post is resolved, planted and immovable. She was striking in the way that the frontier sometimes produced, not the softness of a parlor, but something fiercer and more real, forged from early mornings and hard weather and a refusal to be diminished. She had come from Clayford, 2 counties east, where she had spent 3 years keeping the books for a dry goods merchant named Rufus Crane. Crane had been skimming, false invoices, and the difference routed to a land account in his wife's maiden name. Della had found it simply by doing her job with the precision she brought to everything, and she had made the mistake of saying so. Crane had smiled. He had told her she was confused. Then he had gone to see the town judge, his brother-in-law, and by the following Friday, 2 men had escorted Della to the edge of Clayford and pointed her at the road. No wages, no reference, nothing but the direction they were sending her, and she had taken it because there was nothing else to take. She had 40 cents when the wagon let her off in front of the Harrow Creek general store. The sun was going down. The wind was doing what the wind always did in that country, pushing at everything without apology, lifting the red dust from the street and carrying it across the boardwalk and into the spaces between buildings. Della stood on the planked sidewalk with her carpetbag at her feet and looked at the town. And the town looked back at her with the flat indifference that small places had perfected. Then Caleb Brunt found her. Brunt was the kind of man who wore his money like a second coat, loud, layered, and designed to make you feel smaller. He owned the feed operation at the south end of town and leased grazing land to half the ranchers in the valley, which meant half the ranchers in the valley owed him something and were careful about how they said his name. He came down the boardwalk with 2 of his hands behind him, and he stopped in front of Della with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been told no by someone who mattered to him. He looked at her bag. He looked at her. He said there were no positions for unsponsored women in Harrow Creek. He said it the way a man says something that is technically a statement, but is actually a warning. Della looked up at him. She said she hadn't asked him about positions. She said she was standing on a public walk. One of Brunt's hands stepped forward, Brunt put his own hand on the handle of her carpet bag, not pulling it, just resting his fingers there, which was worse than pulling it, because it was a demonstration of how little effort it would take. "I'll be holding this for you," he said, "until you've made proper arrangements." She gripped the bag. He gripped the handle, and the wind moved through the gap between them. A man on a horse across the street had stopped moving. "Let go of the bag, Caleb." The voice came from across the street, quiet, unhurried, with the particular flatness of a man who had said serious things so many times that serious things no longer required him to raise his voice. Oleander Fitch had come into town for salt and a new axe handle. He had not intended to be watching, but he had been watching, the way a man watches when something in the composition of a scene sets off a low warning in the back of his mind, and what he had seen had been clear enough. He crossed the street at a pace that was deliberate rather than fast. Brunt turned to face him. Something moved behind Brunt's eyes, not fear exactly, but a recalculation. He and Oleander went back 7 years, due to a water dispute that had nearly ended badly for everyone involved, and Brunt had learned in those 7 years that Oleander Fitch was one of the few men in the valley whose opinion of him was entirely indifferent. "This is none of your affair," Brunt said. Oleander stopped at a distance that was close and intentional. He looked at the hand on the bag. He looked at Brunt. "It is now," he said. The hand came off the bag. Brunt held his ground for another moment, pride requiring at least that much. And then he moved on down the boardwalk without looking back, his hands following at a careful distance behind him. Oleander watched until they had turned the corner. Then he looked at the woman on the boardwalk, who was watching him with green eyes that were doing their own careful accounting of what he might cost her. You have somewhere to be tonight?" he asked. "Not presently," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who made offers easily, and he was aware that this was not a simple offer, and he made it anyway. "There's a room in my bunkhouse, clean and dry. You can think in the morning." She studied him for a long moment. He was tall and lean in the way of men who work outdoors, from first light to last, with dark hair going grey at the temples and a face that had been weathered into something angular and still. There was a scar along his left jaw from some earlier chapter of his life. He had not volunteered to explain. He had the hands of a man who worked cattle and mended fence, not the hands of a man who made trouble with them anymore, though she suspected he had once had both kinds of hands and had made a deliberate choice between them. She picked up her bag. She said, "All right." The road out to the Fitch Ranch was 5 miles of red dirt and silence, and the silence was the comfortable kind, not awkward, just vast, the way the country itself was vast. The sun was gone by the time they reached the property line, and the sky had turned that deep particular blue that precedes full dark on the frontier, with the first stars already bright and the land cooling fast beneath them. He showed her the bunkhouse room, a small clean space with a rope bed and a wool blanket, and a window that looked out over the east pasture. He built a fire in the small iron stove and left a tin plate of cold biscuits and dried beef on the table without comment. And he went back to the main house, and Della sat on the edge of the bed and ate every bite of it in the firelight and did not cry, which she considered a personal achievement. In the morning, there was coffee on the stove in the main house, and scrambled eggs, and the smell of wood smoke and something frying in lard that made the whole kitchen feel like a place that had been inhabited by someone who intended to stay. Oleander was already at the table when she came in, reading nothing, just sitting with his coffee, and he did not make anything of the fact that she had come in at all. He told her there was bookkeeping work on the ranch that had been piling up since November. He told her she could do it in exchange for room and board and a fair wage, and that the arrangement could end whenever either of them decided it should, though he said it without looking at her, the way he said most things, aimed at the middle distance, as though he were talking to the general situation rather than to her specifically, which she would come to understand was simply how he communicated, and that it was not coldness, but a kind of economy, a man who had learned to say exactly what he meant and nothing more. She said she would think about it. She thought about it for approximately 40 seconds and then said yes. The weeks that followed were among the most orderly of Della's life. There was real work, the kind that had a beginning and an end and left something accomplished behind it. The ranch books had been neglected for months, and she went through them with precise attention, identifying every error, every unmade entry, every invoice tucked in a drawer and forgotten. Oleander left her to it without hovering, checking in once a day, and otherwise trusting her to handle what she said she would handle. It was an unusual experience for Della, being trusted, and she found she did not know quite what to do with it at first. And then she found that she did. She learned the rhythms of the ranch. She learned that Oleander rose before the sun and was already working by the time the sky went pink, that he stopped at midday for exactly 20 minutes and no longer, and that in the evenings he sometimes sat on the porch and looked at the hills, the way a man looks at something he has fought hard for and is still not entirely sure he deserves. She came to understand that the ranch was not just land to him, it was an argument he was making with himself. The question came in the form of Caleb Brunt, which was perhaps the most predictable thing about him. It was 6 weeks into Della's time at the ranch when Brunt rode out with 3 of his men on a Thursday afternoon, while Oleander was in the far south pasture. They came in without announcement, the way men with money sometimes did. And Brunt told Della that Oleander owed him for grazing rights renegotiated the prior fall, and that the bill was now due. Della said she managed the ranch accounts, and she had not seen any such agreement in the books. Brunt smiled. He said she wouldn't have, because it had been a verbal arrangement, which in his experience was as binding as a written one when he was the one who had made it. He moved toward her as he said it, not threatening, the way a man moves when he wants the air between him and you to mean something. One of his hands stepped in from the side, and Della's back came up against the barn wall, and the wall was sun-hot pine planking, and the man to her left was close enough that she could smell tobacco and leather, and the sweat of a man who believed his proximity was a form of argument. She held very still. Her jaw was the same as it always was. The sound of a horse coming in fast reached her before the horse itself appeared, the hard, irregular rhythm of someone riding at a gallop across dry ground. And then Oleander was in the yard, off his horse before it had fully stopped, and the animal's hooves threw up a curtain of red dust that hung in the air between him and Brunt. What happened next was brief and final, in the way that things involving Oleander Fitch tended to be brief and final. He told Brunt that there was no verbal agreement. He told him that the accounts were current and accurate and managed by someone whose arithmetic he personally trusted. He told him that if he or his men came onto the Fitch property uninvited again, he would bring the matter to the county sheriff, and that the sheriff, unlike the late lamented judge in Clayford, was not in the habit of looking the other way for men who owed him favors. Brunt looked at him. He looked at Della. He read something in the way they were standing relative to each other, something he had not accounted for in his calculations. And whatever he read, it revised his estimate of the situation. He got back on his horse. He rode out. He did not look back. For a long time after, the only sound was the wind moving through the dry grass of the east pasture and the creak of the barn door in its frame. Della let out a breath that she had apparently been holding for some time. "Is there actually a verbal agreement?" she asked. "No," Oleander said. There was another silence, the thinking kind. "Oleander," she said, "why did you stop? That night on the boardwalk. You didn't have to." He was quiet for longer than felt comfortable. A hawk moved across the empty sky above the pasture, riding a current she couldn't feel from the ground. "I was that man once," he said, "the one who kept walking." He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at the hills. "I decided I was done being him. She understood then what the ranch was the answer to. She understood the gun buried behind the barn, though she did not know about the gun yet. That would come later, in a winter conversation by the iron stove, when he told her the whole of it. What she understood now was simpler, that the man standing beside her had made himself from different materials than the man he used to be, and that the effort of it was visible in every line of him, and that she recognized it because she had done something similar, and that recognition between two people who have rebuilt themselves is a rare and particular form of being seen. She looked at the hills alongside him for a while. "Thank you," she said, "for then and for now." He nodded once, as though it was settled. Nay, there was a day in late October when Oleander came in from the south pasture early and found Della at the kitchen table with the books open and a letter beside them. A letter she had not sent and had not shown him because she had not known how. It was from a man named Price, an attorney in the county seat, and it confirmed that Rufus Crane of Clayford had been found to have committed systematic fraud in his accounts, that the matter had been taken up by the county board, and that the testimony of a former employee, her name, her words, delivered by an intermediary she had trusted with the letter months ago, had been instrumental in the case. She was not crying when Oleander came in. She was simply sitting with the letter in her hands, the way you sit with something that has taken a long time to arrive. Yet he sat down across from her without asking. He waited. She told him about Clayford. All of it. Crane, the books, the escort to the road, the wages she never saw. She told it plainly without embellishment, the way she did most things. And he listened with that same still quality she had come to rely on, not filling the silences with comfort, but not flinching from the weight of it either. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "It came right in the end," he said. "It did," she said. "It doesn't always." "No," she said, "it doesn't." He looked at the letter, and then at her, and something in his face shifted. Not a softening exactly, more a settling, the way ground settles after a long rain when the water has found every crack and filled it. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "So not just for the books." She looked at him for a long time. "I'd like that too," she said. They were married on a Saturday in April, 2 weeks before the wildflowers came up on the south slope, in a ceremony attended by the county pastor, the woman who ran the dry goods store in Harrow Creek, who had been quietly kind to Della from the start, and Oleander's nearest neighbor, an old Tejano cattle hand named Ramirez, who had worked the land longer than anyone, and who cried without embarrassment throughout and said it was the dust. The ranch did not become simple after that. Nothing on the frontier stayed simple for long. There were hard summers, a difficult winter, and a dispute with the railroad survey that cost them months of legal correspondence and twice what they expected. But there was the particular satisfaction of hard things shared, which is different entirely from hard things endured alone. They worked side by side in the way of people who have made a clear decision and do not require it to be made again. The gun stayed in the red clay behind the barn. Oleander had not dug it up. He did not intend to. In the evenings, when the work was done, they sat together on the porch steps and watched the sky do what it always did in that country, turning gold, then orange, then the deep, particular red of a frontier sunset, the color of everything the day had been burned down to. The land was wide, and the sky was wider, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, earned over time by two people who had learned they did not need to fill it. It is worth remembering, when the road is long, and the town is indifferent, and the weight of what has been done to you sits heavier than the bag in your hand, that a single moment of steadiness can redirect everything. A man who crossed a street when he might have kept walking. A woman who said yes when she might have said nothing. Two people who recognized in each other the work of rebuilding and decided that work was worth standing beside. The ranch was theirs. The hills were the same hills they had always been, and they were still beautiful, and they were enough.